Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about incentives. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, as a software engineering manager, how can I incentivize the kinds of behaviors that we want to see as a company within the teams? Well, first and foremost, I would suggest that you get a bit of an understanding of what type of people that you need in your teams and sort of what would be required from each individual team and sort of the challenges that such a team might face, because the work that a team does is sort of going to put a bit of a requirement on what type of people are going to be happy working in that environment. I've worked in a range of different teams where the demands on what you have to deal with on a daily basis varies a bit, and so it's sort of important for you to understand what type of people are suited to deal with these sorts of challenges, and to start there, because usually what might happen is that you hire people based on merit alone, which, I mean, merit should be the first and foremost thing that you hire for, but you also have to consider the personality of the individual as well. I remember having a conversation a while back with an old boss of mine where we had an argument about, how to hire people and how to, get people into the right jobs and so forth. And I basically said that it is more important for the company to have the right person for the job than to have the person who has the highest level of experience or so forth. And he didn't really agree, and I said, well, in this case and I had a very perfect example. You see, the problem is when you take someone who is highly skilled and put them on a job they don't want to do, you don't actually get any benefit from it, and the likelihood of them quitting is higher. And we had just such an occasion where we were hiring for a Scala position in this case, and I said, it's dumb, or it's not good for us as a company to invest in people who have no interest in progressing their career further, because this is going to require an investment from them. And so basically the statement I made was, well, we had a prior candidate, or like a person who I knew my manager considered to be like one of the best developers he's ever worked with, and he had quit because he didn't want to learn Scala. And so I said to my manager, this is what happens potentially when you put people in the wrong position, even though they're highly talented. So they have to want to solve the sort of problem that you're dealing with, which is something to always consider. Otherwise you might have, and this happens often, where you have a mismatch in the sort of person that you need and the sort of person you have. And that's the first thing that you should pretty much prioritize. You have to have the right people for the job. The second thing you need to do is to take a look at, alright, what type of behaviors are you looking to incentivize, and how can you encourage that sort of behavior, as you were asking. It really comes down to the nature of the behavior that you want, and in some cases you simply have to understand that you are dealing with human beings, and human beings are not going to change for you. It's a bit well, I don't know what to call it. I think it's a bit misguided to think that one can make something change, and it's all down to how good you are at the thing that you do, or like you just providing the right amount of the right type of incentive. It's not gonna work. I've seen many times. A classic one is that you try to force people to use daily stand-ups or Scrum or something like that. And if you're dealing with people who you can't actually give them a sensation of value from this thing, all that happens is that they will say, yes, boss, and they will go through the motions with you. And the way you test whether or not there is a value in the thing that you are doing is that you simply stop forcing them to do it and you see what happens. And what usually happens is that the whole ritual that you have provided, it just falls together. It doesn't actually fly anymore. Even if you have created a sensation of ownership over the thing, it's most likely not going to still survive. And that gives you a bit of a sensation of how valuable this thing is to these people. And it doesn't actually matter all that much if you think it's valuable, because they don't think it's valuable, and they might never do that. A classic one that I have, I've done this 100 times. I've had conversations with people about, in this case it's for the front-end developers. Like the back-end developers usually are sort of on the ball with this one, I think at the very least, but the front-end developers always fight me on this. Snapshot testing of, in this case it's React components. Snapshot testing for React components. Most of them don't want to do it because their argument is always, I don't feel it's valuable. It takes a lot of time. It's hard to update. It's hard to check the diffs. It doesn't provide any value. And I always tell them like that. No, you are empirically incorrect about that. The reality is that, and this is like, it's not an opinion. It's a fact that when you take a snapshot of an HTML structure, you will catch potentially errors that a visual regression test cannot. You will catch things that a unit test cannot possibly cover, because as I've told them, the problem with HTML is that it has semantic difference when you, for example, add a name to something and you forget to add a name to something, or if you add an ARIA tag, or if you don't add an ARIA tag, sometimes you have dynamic updating attributes on the elements themselves that might change in an unforeseeable way when you change the logic, which in potentially, although it's a minor risk, is probably can have an effect on the actual usability of the page. And snapshots are, as I've said to them 100 times, it's just a way for you to save some time rather than having to write a unit test that tests every possible combination of things that could be added or go wrong on an HTML element that changes its behavior. Because a simple thing as just changing a style in an inline style can break the whole page, and so you need to be aware of if your logic, which might be dynamically allocating styles, changes in some unforeseeable way. And you're probably not going to think about testing that, which means that this is fairly cheap. I have never, ever gotten anybody to adopt it when they didn't want to. If they feel like I am being annoying enough, they will just comply, but they won't do it unless I tell them to. And so you have to have realistic expectations, and sort of my suggestion to you is to set up a work framework for what you are expecting people to do, the bare minimum, and then you encourage the behavior that you want to see in them. But that fundamentally comes back to you setting realistic expectations, because you're probably not going to get someone who is, for example, very introverted to all of a sudden be very extroverted and take on the responsibilities of the team, or like come with a lot of ideas, or so forth and so forth. What you can do is you can facilitate situations where you can help them practice the skills that you want to see, but it's very likely to be fairly slow going. So my suggestion to you is that instead of, as I, because a hackathon, guys, for example, which is like a manager's favorite, a hackathon may not necessarily lead to more innovation from the developers. It's just a way for them, it's a treat, of course, to do this sort of thing, but you're very unlikely to see a drastic personality shift. And so my suggestion to you is to think more in terms of putting requirements on what they have to do in order to basically, I'm not saying force people, what I'm saying is to create a situation where the sort of behavior that you need from the team is happening, and then get the right people in place who will actually do that sort of work, rather than trying to get people who have little to no interest and probably are not going to voluntarily change their behavior, because it is extremely expensive and borderline impossible to change fundamentally how an engineer or how an employee wants to do their job. And if that is something that you require, it is better for you to find people who have those personality traits and help guide them with, as I said, facilitating either projects or discussions or meetings, etc., where they can get to, well, where they get a platform where they can use those, where they can apply that sort of behavior. So what I want you to take away from this is that my first suggestion to you as a software manager, if you want to incentivize behavior, is to get the right people, because you can't force a horse to drink if they don't want to. And it's classic where you have you create entire teams where you haven't given any type of thought into like the sort of personalities that you have within the group, and then all of a sudden that group has to do quote unquote a lot of innovation or something that goes outside of their classic one is lone wolves. You have 3, 4, 5 lone wolves who don't want to cooperate, and all of a sudden you want some collaboration to go with that, and you have a manager who comes in and tries to like, come on guys, we're all going to be a team now, we're all going to work together. That's never going to happen, most likely. Because you're fundamentally trying to make people who don't want to do that, you're forcing them to do something that requires their own engagement, and you can't convince people to be engaged. They have to be the sort of people who want to be engaged. And a lot of managers do this, where like they try to force their vision upon the team, and the reality is that there is a reason why you don't see, you know, team activities and so forth just come down to the fact that you have 1 or 2 people who are really, really good, and then everybody else is sort of sucky. You have to find people who can match and work well together. And in order for you to do that, they have to be open to doing the sorts of things that you want them to do. Second thing you need to do is to facilitate initiatives where they can use their, like they can try that behavior. An example, if you want them to take more responsibility, all right, don't basically change who hosts the meeting or facilitates the meetings to the retros, etc., etc. This is something that I love to do, because I basically say that no, it's not my job to do the stand-up, for example. It's not my job to do the retro. It is a shared responsibility, and we rotate who does it so that everybody can do it, because that is the clearest way that I can get from this idea that, oh, it's his job to do it, and if he is not here to do it, then we don't do it, to them understanding that this is something that you are expected to do, and there is no excuse for it not happening just because I'm not here, because I expect you to do it. It breeds accountability. That's the sort of behavior that I require. It's not something I want to see. I want, this is what they are supposed to do, because it has a benefit. And when you have these sorts of initiatives and you actually make it part of their job to do these sorts of things, then you're not trying to simply bet on that they're gonna, like, out of personal accountability, take on the role. You have made it very clear that it is their responsibility to do these sorts of things. That only works, as I said, to a certain point, because you can't do that with someone where, if you want to get more creativity into the group, there is no way for you to do such a thing and then get creativity from people who don't really have a very strong creative side. And that's why I was saying the first thing is you have to have the right people before these sorts of initiatives can work. Have a great day.